Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael DelGiorno and David Zanotti.
The national debt has gotten completely out of hand. What are we going to do about it? What can we do about it?
So you got onto something this morning on your morning show, which is not to be consumed with the possessive. It's your morning show, the one that you give away every morning to the world. And
the name of it is Your Morning Show.
Yes, Your Morning Show, which is really cool with Michael DelGiorno.
And with David Zanotti.
So you got to talking about the federal budget. I was impressed with your homework. You got the history lesson out on the frequency, the debt, the increases, the periods, and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to ask you what spoke to you the most in the research you were doing about the rise of our national debt.
For the most part throughout our history, it was circumstances outside of ourselves that caused us to take on debt, threats from abroad. Whereas in the last 20 years, it's all been threats from within. That's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is that there was zero debt and zero taxation until World War I, and then there was temporary taxation, and it remained temporary. When the war was over, it went away. Then we had temporary tax for World War II, and it never went away. So, I think there's like three Americas. There's America before the Great Depression, from founding to Great Depression.
I would say America before the income tax.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
All right. Before 1913, the Federal Income Tax Amendment.
But, and then there was a different America throughout the 20s. So that was my main takeaway, and that it is a problem that has spun completely out of control, not so much in the Woodrow Wilson era as much as in the Podesta Obama postmodern revisited Woodrow Wilson administrative state period. And it's an ambition we simply can't afford.
If Wilson could have.
Oh, he would have.
Yeah, if Wilson could have, he would have. But he got knocked out. He got knocked out by World War I. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt was well underway in regards to changing the role of government to fixing your problems in the name of the Great Depression. But that dragged on and on and on. And he had tremendous resistance from the political parties, and he had tremendous resistance from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court knocked down program after program after program that Wilson tried to change the role of government. Then comes World War II, and now all of our focus is on saving the world from a desperate darkness. And so people are willing to do anything. But the sacrifices that the American people made enabled us to not have to go through the incredible debt that war could have cost us. But still, we were willing to go into debt to preserve our liberty and to save the world. And we weren't wrong for that. But then you get to Lyndon Baines Johnson. It's
interesting. All the documentaries that you find on John F. Kennedy, it'll talk about his mistrust of the military complex. He was going to shatter the CIA. He was going to dismantle the FBI. And he was, and that was the plan.
Sounds like Dwight David Eisenhower.
Yeah, and he was, and that was the plan. What is never talked about was that John F. Kennedy was going to take things back to before the New Deal, let alone he gets killed in Dealey Plaza. LBJ gets inserted. All of the movies and even the documentaries will cover how Lyndon Baines Johnson gave them that Vietnam War that they were wanting in the military complex. But none of them ever covered the fact that it went from going back before the New Deal, had John F. Kennedy won a second term, to LBJ and the Great Society, the great bookend to the New Deal. So that, and I think in that is first of all, one of the greatest policy failures in human political history, because how are we doing in our war on poverty for LBJ? The other part of that aspect is tremendous administrative state spending. Now, Barack Obama took it and doubled 220 years in 6 years. And I don't have to tell you that both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have doubled it again since then. So, I think we've had a spending problem that we haven't acknowledged. And I think it has shifted from enemies abroad to an administrative state ambition within. And I think it's been really bad the last 20 years. I think it's a pretty easy thing to take away, don't you think?
It's an amazing story. It starts with the philosophical seeds that were planted in the progressive movement, which is that government is here to help you. And that's where Reagan had the turn on the phrase, the best, scariest words in the world is I'm from Washington and I'm here to help you. Well, that's the whole concept of government being the helper. No one articulates that better than Joe Biden, but Republicans have been just as wrong. When the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, decided that they were going to make their big crusade for homeownership, and they began to mobilize government to make absolutely certain that anybody who wanted to own a home could have the opportunity to own a home. And you saw all the changes happening in the debt structure in regards to home mortgages. Those were seeds that were sown,
buying up student loans, right?
Yeah, same situation, student loans. Joe Biden is the penultimate example of someone who says, this is my chance to make government work for you and for us to reshape American society with the leverage we have in the power of the federal government. Now, Donald Trump didn't help anything in regards to what he did in COVID because he turned a blind eye to the economic consequences of his actions, and that hurt America every bit as much. It was a bad, bad, bad move. But the permanent underclass in America that's been created by the war on poverty, using the power of entitlement. Now, when we talk about entitlements, we think that it's an attitude. No, it's not an attitude. It's a legal process. Yes, most people explain to me how the federal budget works. I went to Washington, D.C. and did 3 days of research with key players in congressional positions to try to get some small modicum of understanding of what actually happens when we create the federal budget and why it's so difficult. First off, it happens every year. That's obscene. That's ridiculous. Congress should do one budget per session. All right, that's a quick way of making an amazing amount of changes. It would be stunning to see how quickly we could create space. That's just a tactical move that they won't touch. But here's the way it works. When a great crusade goes on around the country about the federal government should now take over this portion of the economy and do X, Y, Z for X number of people, you can talk about it till you're blue in the face. But when you pass a law, it goes into a title of the United States Code, thus entitlement.
Right.
What they do is they create a circumstance, class of people, and set of conditions in that law that says if such and such happens to people in such and such situations, then the federal government will do so-and-so. It is a statutory law that is passed into a title of the code. When that happens, it makes people literally entitled, whoever enter into the circumstances. There's no such thing as a case-by-case or a revisitation. If you meet the following qualifications, then you fit into the program.
Well, Social Security, this always rubs people the wrong way. If Social Security is technically an entitlement, though it shouldn't be because you pay into it over a lifetime, get a terrible return. It's really, frankly, a Ponzi scheme, as it has been called. But it falls under entitlement, too. And whether you're 62 and dumb enough to take the penalty or 67 or 70.
Social Security isn't anywhere near the most dangerous of these programs because you're paying into it. The rest of these programs you qualify for based on circumstances. So when people say, well, we've got to cut entitlements, excuse me, the only way you're going to cut entitlements is to go back into those laws and erase them completely or amend the specifics to reduce the program. You cannot cut an entitlement program by cutting the budget. You can't do that. It's illegal because the law says people in the following circumstances shall get the following benefits. So this is why when people say, just cut the budget, it's just not that simple. They set it up to be that kind of a trap, that kind of a spider web. So that's the first thing we've got to understand. Secondly, just passing the budget doesn't make it real. After passing the budget, you've got appropriations. So it follows, one thing follows the next. It can be done, but it is a very difficult process to unhinge this stuff, get inside, hollow it out, and fix it with a majority vote in both the House and a 60% supermajority vote in the Senate. So all the blah, blah, blah from the Tea Party types and the budget cutters and blah, blah, all the balanced budget, blah, 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 blah. Listen, those are all great theories.
You have to address intent and law.
But you have to do the work. You have to find people in office that are going to get their sleeves rolled up and not quit until they get all the lines figured out, all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. And that takes a tremendous amount of work. And here's the problem. It's like Voldemort's snake. You've got this administrative state waiting there to bite the heads off of any politician or anyone who dares touch their money. It's a very complicated process and takes a tremendous amount of focus, attention, and courage.
When you subscribe to 1850 Main Street, you're the first to find out what's happening next with new guests, publications, and events. And when you spread the word about 1850 Main Street, you're helping others find real answers to the real questions facing America right now. To learn more, visit 1850mainstreet.com. And please, tell a friend.
I don't want to oversimplify this or insult you in any way, because everything you've said is very brilliant, and it's missed.
That's not brilliant. It's just true.
It's true, common sense, brilliant, and it's missed because it's not in anybody's conversation anywhere, any place. But having said that, isn't it as simple as, if you wonder how to solve this problem, well, first go back and trace how you got in this mess, and it's a pretty easy way to trace your way out of this mess. And you're going to get back to that original choice. Do you want to be a self-governed people in a representative republic, or do you want to be dependents in an administrative state?
All right. And I'll tell you the answer to that is B. 50% of American households do not pay taxes to the federal government. They pay taxes, but they do not pay federal taxes, income taxes to the federal government. And if you take the people who are now permanently in an underclassed government care situation, that means they get food stamps, they get health care, they get housing, they get all sorts of benefits if they're raising children. You put the entire package together of what those benefits mean, that person to be basically moved out of that situation and into the workforce needs to have a minimum job of $60,000 a year with a healthcare provision. Now, how are you going to get people out of poverty if you've escalated their position of entitlement to the place where they don't have to work and they're making the equivalent of 60 grand and they have their health care?
And quite frankly, they could be earning some money on the side and not reporting it to boot.
And just need to be careful. One thing, we're not talking about black people here. We're talking about all people.
No, actually,
and that's a big mistake.
Actually, it depends on if you look at it per capita or by percentage, but overall, Caucasians.
There's more white
use
people doing this than black people. There's more white people in Pennsylvania doing this, okay, than people would ever imagine. So this isn't about race.
At some point, though, too, David, and by the way, the way that's all, we never did give them the background. All right, so the way this came up is we've reached the $34 trillion debt mark. And the White House spokesperson tells everybody all the blame belongs on Donald Trump. Now, first of all, you're talking about a 200-year number, and you're going to blame it on a guy that was in office 4 months? Now, did he make a big COVID mistake and shut down the economy that cost us trillions? Yes, but you can't blame $34 trillion on him and his tax cuts specifically. It was an insult to anyone's common intelligence. So we go back and we look at the history of debt. And what you find is the market crash that led to the Great Depression, 1929, we went to $17 billion. Then you don't really have any movement whatsoever until the New Deal and then Social Security. And that'll account all the way up to $35 billion. These are billions, not trillion. The third New Deal will get you to $36 billion. The Depression ends. We're at $40 billion of debt. FDR increases spending and raises taxes at the same time. Now, you might be interested. People always say that. Oh, well, let's, increase spending and let's raise taxes to pay for it. That's good, because that's what somebody's going to suggest we do at $34 trillion. How'd that work out for us? We went from $43 billion to $72 billion of debt by raising taxes. Kennedy had a lot to teach on that. And then by the end of 1943, and now you're into World War II as well, you jump immediately to $137 billion. You get to over $250 billion by the end of the war. You pretty much live there. This is going to shock people. You pretty much live in that range all the way through the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Then you get the Great Society of LBJ, which takes you through to Nixon and gets you into the Vietnam War. But even then, you're hovering around $400 billion of debt. After Watergate, it got bad, and you get up to about $800 billion of the debt by the time Jimmy Carter, and it's not till Reagan that we go over the $1 trillion mark. And then you can fast forward. It's a very slow growth until you're at $10 trillion by 2008. By the time Barack Obama leaves office, you're at $20 trillion. By the time Trump, and if Biden leaves office in the next year, you will have nearly doubled it again, that 10. These are extraordinary, rapid numbers.
We have lost complete touch with the reality of all of this. People have no idea that they are going to be spending the rest of their lives and their children's lives and their grandchildren's lives giving a minimum of 50% of their income every year to the federal government from now into perpetuity.
You are enslaved to this debt. That's biblical.
We are completely enslaved by our government.
And paying for it already in inflation.
But here's the other side of this equation, because as soon as you start talking about this, you are immediately a racist. You are immediately an arrogant rich person, a one percenter who doesn't care, blah, 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 blah. We have a permanent underclass in our culture where we've said 50% of American households don't have to pay a dime. They don't have to pay $1. Now, I've been thinking about this. What number would they have to pay to actually make a single dollar dent in a sense of participation? Well, you could say, well, if every one of those people just gave $1, well, no, probably, and I'm totally ballparking on this. My guess is they probably would have to give $120 or $10 a month to be able to make a $1 to $10 dent. Because the administrative state that would process that money would actually chew up about 100 of the dollars processing the paperwork.
You do realize by the end of this, we've got to give people some hope. Careful. Okay. You're digging.
But that's one thing. Second thing, and nobody talks about it anymore. One of the fastest ways to change the dynamic of this is to move to a flat tax. You move to a flat tax that's built intelligently, and that means everybody has the responsibility of paying something. Right. That's that. Because if you want the protection of the United States, I don't care if you are a wino living under the bridge. May God have mercy on your soul and mine.
A fair tax would accomplish the same thing. But a fair, flat, whatever. I get you. In fact, so
the combination
much.
Of those
I
things.
love that so much, David. Remember when we talked about our magic wands? I'm going to add that to it.
That's important. That's very important.
If we had term limits, if we had a prioritized zero-based balanced budget, you couldn't raise the debt ceiling. So you balance your budget, stop the deficit spending. If we had term limits, if you didn't like returning the United States Senate to state appointments, but how about paper voting in person?
One budget every 2 years.
Flat tax. I mean,
biennial budget. Sure. These are all practical things that households would do.
Solve everything.
It would solve a lot. But there's one other problem, and that's who are the real addicts here. Read an article in the Wall Street Journal just the other day talking about crisis pregnancy centers and the fact that the Biden administration is now trying to use a federal rule to restrict federal funding from going into crisis pregnancy centers, claiming that they are not really dealing with keeping people trying to prevent pregnancies, that's not really what they're about. One of these, it's a purely political fight. It's blah, blah, blah. And the Biden administration is trying through administrative rule, which means using the snake of the administrative state to bite off the head of a good idea. Okay, so what they're trying to do is to stop any form of federal funding going into crisis pregnancy centers. Well, that reminds me of when the idea came forward, driven mostly by Catholics and evangelicals, to get federal funding for crisis pregnancy centers. And the angle was the federal government is giving money to Planned Parenthood, not accordingly, not to abortion, was what they said, but to other.
We all know how
so we should get money in crisis pregnancy centers. And we stood up as an organization at the American Policy Roundtable and said, no, we're running a deficit in our country. We don't need the government to help us do the job we're supposed to do. This is a terrible idea. It is hypocrisy beyond imagination. How can you ever criticize the federal debt when you're sitting there taking money for something private dollars should be funding? Do you know?
I interrupt to say this is one of those moments where the room turns its back like an angry cat on David, and he's never welcome back to the discussion.
And once again, thrown out of more meetings and more, right? Because and you know what? There was no answer. But I'll take it one step farther and get thrown out of something more. How many Christian organizations, Christian companies took PPP money during COVID?
I almost got fired over this topic directly because I spoke against individuals and companies who participated in it. And I said, you just sold your liberty. You just sold your freedom. And, our founding fathers gave their life, gave their wealth, risked it all. Many gave their lives, and people sold it for a $2,000 check. And I made a comment just like that on the air. And I was accused of being a real you-know-what, an insensitive you-know-what. And David, the truth is just, the bigger these lies get, the more offensive the truth is.
So people ask, well, where's the hope? Look, I don't know that we have any in this regard.
It may be in bankruptcy.
It may be that our only hope is for the federal system to collapse in regards to fiscally collapse. And then we have to start over.
Well, that's inevitable, don't you think? I mean, you're getting service on the debt alone is going to chew up your entire GDP.
Right now, it's 11%. It's 11% of expenditures right now coming out of the federal budget. That's dangerous because every time those interest rates rise, they just don't raise on young people who can't get a home. They raise on all, and that's money more we owe. So this is a crisis. I'd love to give people some happy, magical wand a statement about how it's all going to be fixed. I will tell you this much. Social Security is not the problem. That is manageable. And Medicare is not the problem because that's actually an insurance program that works. Mm-hmm. The problem is all that other stuff.
But there's been robbing of it. So we've used disability, and it's not real disability, to rob Social Security. In terms of Medicare and Medicaid, there's a lot of fraud. It's so interesting. You brought up flat tax, and we want to add that to a prioritized zero-based budget, term limits, paper ballots, in-person voting only, flat tax. We could almost add another one, and that's everything that we're talking about in terms of this. What if we took $34 trillion? Now, of course, we got taxpayers and tax receivers. So there's two things. Half people aren't paying anything, and then you have a portion of people that are underage and families. It would come to about $270,000 for working tax-paying families. But here's my deal, David. I think every one of them should get the bill. And I think they should have a plan to pay it off in 30 years. If they want to free their future generations like our grandfathers and great-grandfathers did, but also they'll take a lot more seriously the spending going on in Washington by their representatives because it'll be their money, not invisible money.
I'll back you up even a step farther. Let's go back to the fact that this all really was triggered, and I don't even remember what year it began, but when withholding tax became the law of the land and you didn't get to see what was actually coming out of your paycheck. You just saw you get to see what's coming out of your paycheck, but you no longer had to pay your taxes.
Oh, well, it's like when you go to a casino, there's a reason to give you a chip and you're not putting bills on the table. It's so that you don't know, you get used to it. You get conditioned. You notice it.
So none of these are easy questions. And that's why we get to talk about them here, because you won't find any of this conversation on the campaign trail, either for Congress or the White House. These people know what the problem is. They lack the guts to tell us how much trouble we're in.
I don't have to remind you that in 2000, we were arguing over lock boxes for Social Security. That was the big campaign fight between Al Gore and George W. Bush. And how foolish did that look in September of 2001? Pretty foolish.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.